Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good break. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to present an update from DERT, the Division of Extramural Research and Training, update you on some activities and laying some of the foundation for some of tomorrow's discussion. John, I thought I had control, but it's not going. Okay, now it's going. So I'm going to walk through 4 areas. First is just some staffing updates. Update you on some different activities that we're doing across the division since the June council meeting and leading up to February council. Present a fairly high level overview of our Pfas portfolio, and then introduce some kind of emerging topics that we'll delve into more in the future in an interagency partnership with OSTP and the Joint Subcommittee on Environment, Innovation, and Public Health. So first, some staffing changes. And specifically, we want to welcome 2 new members of the DERT family. So the first is Dr. Alicia Wade, who joined our team this summer, and she will be working as a supervisory program specialist on our administrative officer team. So supervising our program specialists who handle all of our purchasing and time cards and travel and just serve a really critical role in the division, making sure that everything happens on time and in the proper way. Lakeisha, Dr. Wade, comes to us from Fort Bragg. She is a U.S. Army veteran, and she spent more than 15 years in the military working in procurement, ammunition procurement for the Special Forces team there. So she's got some very powerful connections. And importantly to us, she has a doctorate in business administration with a specialty on employee retention. So I think that she's really going to be able, not just in terms of the work that she does, but in helping us as a division really kind of improve our culture and enhance our employee engagement and retention. Our second new employee is Ms. Alicia Graham, who's actually a re-employee. Alicia actually worked with us as an intern while she was a student and is coming back to our family. She has a master's in public administration and worked in both academia at UNC Chapel Hill in their sponsored programs office, but also in the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a grant specialist. So she's come to our grants management office as a grant specialist, and I'm sure many of our grantee community will enjoy working with Alicia over the next few years, several years. And I want to acknowledge a few of our close colleagues and friends who are going to be stepping away to other opportunities and other phases of their lives over the next few months. So the first is Rosemary Moody, who started working for us about 10 years ago as a contractor, supporting what is now the Hazardous Substance Research Branch, then was the Center for Risk and Integrated Sciences. She became a federal employee in 2013 and worked to support HSRB before she got a promotion to work as a program specialist, reporting to Pat and helping with a lot of our council duties. Rose has received a promotion to go to NIDA, where she'll be working with their council. It's a great opportunity for her. We're excited for her, but we're sad that she's leaving our family. Our next announcement is that Ms. Martha Barnes, who many of you on the epidemiological side have worked with for several years, is going to be retiring at the end of October. And she came to us in DERT in 1994, but to NAEHS in 1985, working in the Division of Intramural Research. And since she came to DERT, she's really led all of our activities on tracking clinical trials, human subjects, retention, policy adherence, those kinds of things. And for a long time, she coordinated several of our important programs, such as our conference grants. She was the original program officer for our time-sensitive program, and she led an interagency program with the Department of Health and Human Services on research integrity for many years. So as I said, Martha is going to be retiring and moving into another phase of her life, but she's promised to stay in touch. And next, Pat Mastin has announced his intention to retire at the end of the year. So many of you know Pat. He served as the acting director for much of the time since when moved over as acting deputy director of the Institute. But Pat joined the government in 1983 as an intramural investigator with NAEHS, came to NAEHS in 1998, where he has served in just numerous roles in the division, initially as a review officer, then a program officer, being promoted to a branch chief fairly quickly, has been our deputy division director as his permanent job since 2007, so 15 years. But as in his role as the deputy division director, he's served many different roles, including acting division director, the acting chief of grants management branch, acting chief of review, and when Ben Van Houten left before Christy Drew was hired as branch chief, he was also the acting chief of the program analysis branch. So Pat's also going to be retiring. He has offered to consider coming back as a contract employee to help us get through February Council, which I think we would very much appreciate. And I'm sure he's not going to disappear for too terribly long from the scene, and we'll enjoy getting back to a life of guitar and painting and travel and lots of other activities. Then I want to announce we'll be doing some backfills for those positions which we're still working through HR on, so I don't want to announce those too much, but I do want to announce a pending recruitment. And so NIH now hires health science administrators, both review officers and program officers, through what are called global recruitments on USA Jobs. So institutes no longer have the opportunity to put in specific language that calls out expertise that we're looking for in those positions. So I wanted to highlight these in this presentation so that you as our community are aware of what we're looking for in program officers, and that these opportunities are available. We'll also be sending these out to the grantee listserv and other sources that we have available to us. So the first, and this really touches on a point that Trevor raised in the last discussion, recognizing that we have a need for deeper expertise in computational biology in order to enable us to advance our portfolio, both in terms of multi-omic integration, but also in particular exposure and toxicology modeling kinds of activities. So we're hiring a program officer into the exposure response and technology branch to really develop these programs. We have a very small portfolio now, but we see this as being a really critical need for us moving our science forward. The second opportunity is in the population health branch, where I was hoping that we get money in, and recognizing that we have broadened our mission to explicitly include climate change as an environmental stressor. We're looking to hire a program officer to really lead with deep expertise in climate change and the associated health effects of climate into the population health branch. And then the third one is recognizing that the worker training program, their staff have not been characterized as being program officers in the past, but recognizing that the job function that they serve really is as a program officer. We're looking at an opportunity to hire someone with more scientific expertise in health and safety and handling of hazardous waste as a program officer into the worker education and training branch. So this will be an opportunity to really recognize the value of the employees in that branch to the division and the critical function that they serve. So again, this announcement will be going out on USA Jobs on September 21st, and will be out for just 9 days. So it's a very short period of window to get your applications in. These are great opportunities for anyone with a PhD, but particularly for very promising junior faculty and senior program staff that are looking for something away from the bench that they can flex their scientific muscles in, as Rick likes to say, identifying where the puck is going to be, not where it is right now. So shifting gears and presenting on some updates on activities that we've been doing as the division since the June Council. As always, we hold a number of workshops, and this summer has been particularly busy for us. Rick highlighted a couple of these: the Core Centers meeting in New York and the Exposome workshop series throughout July and August. But I also wanted to highlight a couple other really interesting and important meetings that we held. So in June, Cindy Lawler and colleagues organized a workshop on the role of nutrition and interaction with environmental exposures in the etiology and progression and potentially prevention of autism and the related spectrum disorder. I also wanted to highlight that we continued our meetings with the historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions. So we had a leadership discussion with a number of representatives from that community to update on some activities we've been doing on DEIA as an institute, and hearing more of their experiences and concerns as we move forward with this. We also organized as a product of a trans NAEHS activity, a workshop at the end of August from our combined exposures and mixtures working group that's led by Danielle Carlin and Cynthia Ryder in the Division of Translational Toxicology. A workshop looking at how mixtures of environmental exposures influence breast cancer as a specific focus, but really focused on the computational models, statistical tools, and exposure challenges in doing mixtures research, which I think is really critical setup for how we move forward with some of the exposome activities that we've been working on over the years. Highlighting some upcoming activities that we have, and some of these are still past, so they're organized by month. Just a week ago, we held another version meeting of our Driven community. So this is our network that we have established of the recipients of our diversity supplements. An opportunity for them to meet each other and form a network, meet us, the NAEHS staff that they can and should be interacting with, but also have some career panels. So we brought in some of our more senior investigators to share some thoughts and wisdom on what we can be doing going forward. Highlighting the summit that we're doing to conclude the summer of exposome activities. So this is really focused on taking the output from all of those earlier discussions that we had in July and August, and starting to put those into an operational framework and a series of demonstration projects that we can share with the community to really think about how do we move forward with the exposome. Looking forward to that. And then a few grantee meetings through the fall, our worker training program, our HERE program, and the Superfund program, which will be held here in Raleigh in December. I think that's the only one that's an open in-person meeting for the SRP program. So changing gears a little bit, I wanted to do some sharing of information that we're doing to share some information with you. So we've put a lot of attention over the summer to improving our website and making more information available there. So I want to call attention to these two URLs, a webpage that we've established with kind of instructions and resources on grantsmanship and grants policy and some kind of best practices for preparing an application and being competitive with that. But we're also starting to do some little bit of deeper dive into some pain points. And this is organized by Jenny Greer and our grants management staff. To get into some kind of frequently asked questions and some areas where we're seeing more broad concerns or issues with some of our grant applications. And so we've created a web page now that gets into the distinctions between unobligated balances and carryovers and the processes and procedures that you need to go through in understanding the difference between an obligated balance and a carryover, and for those programs that are not on SNAP, how to request the access to those unobligated funds for a bona fide need in any given year. And then I also wanted to highlight that we've entered into a program. This is an initiative across NIH to broaden the definition of diversity and a recognition that particularly in accessing senior career opportunities, women really are still underrepresented in the scientific workforce. And so NIEHS has committed to supporting women regardless of background for investigator level diversity supplements. So we're not considering these at lower levels of pre-doc, postdoc, post-baccalaureate, but at the faculty level, we will consider diversity supplement requests for women as underrepresented group. And then also I wanted to highlight as part of the Biden administration's emphasis on environmental justice, that we've been putting together a lot of resources on the Justice 40 initiative and the critical role that the worker training program and the environmental career worker training program play as one of the initial pilot and landmark programs of the Justice 40 initiative. So to highlight that for our community. And finally, recognizing that data sharing and the new data sharing requirement that goes into effect in January is going to be a steep learning curve and a stressful time for our grantee community. We've developed a webpage with a lot of resources, overview of the policies, some guidance on preparing data sharing plans, and then getting into some of the issues that I think Chris will talk about this afternoon of making data available in a way that is meaningful. So getting into the FAIR values and some of the need for standardization or harmonization and improvements in our data repository. So there's a wealth of information here on scientific data sharing, and I encourage you to follow this URL. This website just went live yesterday afternoon, so this is hot off the press information for you. So now shifting into our Pfas portfolio. So this is the scientific content of my presentation. Just giving you a high-level overview of what we were doing across the division in Pfas. In fiscal year 21, NAEHS, through our grants program, invested just a hair less than $22 million in PFAS. This is little less than 5% of our total grants budget. So it's a fairly significant investment as a percentage of our budget. In 21, this amounted to 9 new projects which were funded, raising our total up to 42 total projects. And this does include, I want to emphasize, our Superfund research program, so not just our HHS budget. These 42 awards are made to 29 different institutions and highly productive. We had 28 publications in fiscal year 21 from our PFAS grantees, and highly impactful as well. We had a total of 32 PFAS-related news items that we tracked through the OCPL, the Office of Communication and Public Liaison, for I think that this is fiscal year or calendar year 22 that we've had just these 32 items already. And the portfolio is growing significantly. So 5 years ago in 2016, it was right around $10 million. And in 21, it was, as I said, around $21.8 million. So it's growing significantly. And the productivity of the portfolio has grown even more commensurately. So up from 21 publications per year to 166 publications a year from our PFAS grants. So this is a report from an internal analysis tool that we have called iReport. So this is not something that you can access, but it's something that we can use to help ourselves understand our portfolio better. So we've taken all of those projects that are coded as being PFAS-focused projects, and kind of done a hierarchical word cloud, if you wish. So these bins are not proportional to the number of projects into them, and they're not unique terms, but it shows the arrangement of kind of the emphasis of these projects. So you can see the keywords of different ways of referring to the substances, PFAS, PFASs, perfluoroalkyl substances, but also starting to see some of the content of these projects. So a lot of focus on drinking water with 25 projects, a lot of focus on early life, and we'll get into this with some of the epidemiological findings in coming slides. But you can see that these also look at, public health outcomes, liver, exposure to persistent organic pollutants. You can also see a major role here in endocrine disrupting, looking particularly at thyroid hormone as kind of the hierarchical nature here, and then also calling out the known effect of these on metabolism in the liver. So getting into some of the projects, and this is not inclusive, I'm not covering every project that we are supporting here, but showing that this really is an international scope. This slide's a couple years old. This is 2019 view of the portfolio, but we really are supporting research all around the world on PFAS. And emphasizing here that while this is a fairly large portfolio, it's also a very small portfolio in that we really only have 2 projects that de novo, from the time that they applied, were specifically focused on PFAS. And so the first is the GenX exposure study that Jane Hoppen will be speaking about tomorrow, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but this is exposure to one of the short chain replacement PFAS compounds that's a very high burden of exposure along the Cape Fear River Basin, which includes much of the Triangle. And then also want to highlight one of our research to action projects from the Silent Spring Institute with Laurel Shader as the PI. And this is looking at a community impact from PFAS contaminated drinking water, and specifically looking at immunotoxicity and looking at the response to vaccination and infection in a highly exposed community in the Cape Cod area. So just presenting some highlights of our epidemiological portfolio and some of the current studies that we are funding here. A lot of these are projects that came in focused on other environmental exposures that have expanded to include PFAS as another important potential contributor to their outcomes. So these first five I'm highlighting are pregnancy birth cohorts that are looking at a range of outcomes. So the home study in Cincinnati is looking at that metabolic and endocrine effect, and also looking at impacts of PFAS exposure on brain anatomy and function, as well as behavior and mood. This is a really understudied area of emphasis for PFAS. The Project Viva out of Boston is a large birth cohort with 2,000 mother-child pairs, looking at the interaction between diet and environmental exposures that is expanded to include PFAS, and looking at the health of the child through development. The Healthy Start study is an ethnically diverse cohort in Colorado, focusing kind of specifically on metabolism and behavioral outcome, both in the mother and in the children. Marbles, I'm sure Irva can answer any questions you have on marbles, is a longitudinal study of women who have had a child with autism spectrum disorder and who are having another biological child. So a high risk of development of autism spectrum disorder and other developmental delays, and looking at a range of exposures, now including PFAS in contribution to autism. And then the Presto pregnancy study online, which is a web-based cohort, looking at a variety of lifestyle factors and impacts on fertility and pregnancy. And this one is starting to look into male partners as well, and so getting into some of the potential impact of PFAS exposures on male infertility as well. But it's not just pregnancy. Pregnancy is a frequent flyer for us because it's more tractable in the time frame of an R01. But we do have a number of grantees that are also looking at other life stages. So Gen X is an all-comer. It's a regionally located, predominantly adult community. The Teen Labs is a study looking at bariatric surgery outcomes and the impact of multiple environmental exposures on success in weight loss following bariatric surgery, including PFAS now. And the SWAN study, which is a study looking at the health of women in their middle years with a number of outcomes, including physical, biological, psychological, and social changes. And then it's not really a cohort in and of itself, but I want to always be hyping the HERE program and the value that this has provided some of these cohorts as well as others to add exposures onto existing cohorts. So to date, HERE, I believe, has approved 14 new projects to add PFAS exposures onto existing cohorts that previously had not considered these important exposures, and really does, kind of going back to that breast cancer workshop, set us up to be able to do a deeper multiple exposure, combined exposure and mixtures analysis in the future. And all of the data from the HERE projects are made publicly available once they clear embargo. I think it's currently 24 projects that are off of embargo with HERE, so are sourced to come back and do some secondary data analysis. And as I said on the map, it's not all domestic population studies. So we've been supporting the Philippe Grandjean's efforts in the Faroes Islands cohort, which is a very high burden of persistent organic pollutant cohort, tracked longitudinally back into the 80s. As well as the Danish National Birth Cohort, which goes back into the 90s, looking at a number of exposures in both populations and a broad range of outcomes. But it's not all epidemiology, and I think Brian will also dig into some of the mechanistic research in greater detail that DTT is supporting. But we have a number of mechanistic studies that are really digging into what is the in vitro evidence to support an association between PFAS and the outcomes that we're seeing in the epidemiological cohorts, as well as possibly feeding new endpoints into epidemiological research. So we have a number of projects that are looking into the metabolic effects and the effects on the liver. Some interesting studies that are looking into cardiovascular effects, including preeclampsia and hypertension, getting into the immune function and digging into how PFAS alter both innate as well as acquired immunity, and that's that vaccine response piece. Getting into reproductive function, both male and female, reproduction and fertility concerns, as well as placental function and early child development. And then finally, we have a few projects that are setting up to do high throughput screening using organ-on-chip devices and other NAMs to test PFAS effects in a hypothesis generating discovery enabled context, and setting up some in silico modeling efforts to help us predict toxicity of the broad range of PFAS compounds that are out there. And of course, we have to acknowledge the important work that the Superfund program is doing in PFAS. Much of this is in their biomedical research components, doing very similar work to what our HHS supported efforts are doing. But the important and unique aspect of Superfund is that research is linked to efforts to develop technologies to reduce the burden of exposure. So removing PFAS from drinking water and from soil and contaminated sites, and as well as, of course, Superfund is also a program that emphasizes community engagement in their research. And so we have a lot of activities going on in Superfund around the breadth of the range of activities for PFAS. So looking across our portfolio and kind of setting a couple seeds to feed into our panel discussion tomorrow afternoon, we see a number of gaps in the data that we think are opportunities for some future work. So digging deeper into the reproductive and developmental effects, looking specifically at what are the effects on miscarriage, birth defects, and also that early childhood breast development that the BSERP program showed was a concern for later risk of breast cancer development. Looking at the neurological outputs, we've noticed in some of the mechanistic research that there are both age and sex-specific neurological differences that need to be followed up, as well as clinical measures that we can use in both young and older adults to anchor some of our epidemiological studies. Digging into those immune effects and looking at the clinically relevant changes that we see with PFAS. And we've had a couple of our COVID supplements that we're looking at impacts of PFAS exposure on infectious disease and COVID specifically. And then digging a little bit deeper into the thyroid effects, looking at early markers of effect, individual risk factors, and those sorts of things. And then setting up the need for some improved exposure assessment, and really kind of getting at the patterns of PFAS that reflect different sources of exposure, whether that's from consumer products, contaminated drinking water, the firefighting foams, those kinds of things. We have some mechanistic studies, but I really think that this is an opportunity for an expansion of our translational toxicology work, and really getting that mechanistic linkage, as Karen was saying earlier, to anchor some of our studies. And then finally, the need for more interventions. As we get more into environmental justice and community engaged research, the need to be able to deliver to the communities strategies to reduce their burden of exposure and prevent future disease. So finally, and probably right on time, heading into my fourth and final vignette, I want to present on some activities that we're doing as an interagency partnership through the White House and the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and what we affectionately call the JEEP, the Joint Subcommittee on Environment, Innovation, and Public Health. So the JEEP was formed as a response to the 2021 omnibus appropriation, the National Defense Authorization Act, called for OSTP to establish a work group to coordinate federal activities and promote federal activities in environmental public health. So we've been charged to conduct landscape and gap analysis of the interagency portfolio, carry out strategic planning between agencies of activities that we should be doing, coordinating our research activities and research and development activities, and finally recommend policy options to Congress, to the White House, and to the regulatory agencies. So the JEEP is an interagency partnership. I'm not sure how many agencies. I think it's in the neighborhood of 20 agencies on the JEEP, but it's led by OSTP, the Environmental Protection Agency, and NIH. So Brian Barrage is the co-chair of the JEEP, and JEEP has 3 strategy teams. The first is focused on contaminants of emerging concern, and that's going to be the focus of the rest of my presentation. The second is pulling out the per and polyfluoral alkyl substances as a specific interagency need for coordination. So that's led by OSTP, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Department of Defense. And then the third is focused on, and Heather Henry and Sue Fenton are our representatives to the PFAS committee. And then the third is focused on sustainable chemistry, and Scott Mastin from DTT is the NAEHS representative to the sustainable chemistry. But this group meets on a monthly basis with the full group meeting, including all of the JEEP members, I think on a quarterly basis. So the CEC effort, so this is the strategy team. It's co-chaired by Melanie Buser, who is the Assistant Director for Environmental Health within the OSTP. Annette Giuseppe Eli from EPA, who is the Acting National Program Director for Chemical Safety and Sustainability. Myself in my role as Chief of the Exposure Response and Technology Branch, and Jenny Collins in ERTB, who serves as the Executive Secretary of the CEC effort. So this group meets on a weekly basis to coordinate our activities, and then on a monthly basis we meet with our larger interagency team, which includes 18 agencies across the federal government, to coordinate our activities as we go forward. So the CEC effort was actually called out in the fiscal year 2020 NDAA. And I just put a snip of the language here that's called for the director of OSTP and the administrator of EPA to work together to establish what they termed a National Emerging Contaminant Research Initiative, with a time restraint to draft that of 180 days from the approval of the budget in 2020. There was a draft within the timeline, but this specifically calls out a definition of contaminants of emerging concern, which are not just chemical and physical or radiological contaminants, but any compound found in drinking water for which there is not a promulgated regulatory standard. So this would not include PFAS now, specifically because there has been a promulgated regulatory standard. But it does include a broad range of chemical and physical stressors, such as microplastics, for instance. So this summer, we actually published the final version of the National Emerging Contaminant Research Initiative, which we call the NECRI. And this is really recognizing a vision that all Americans deserve access to clean and plentiful drinking water. And that the current regulatory framework really does not support that. So we lay out a number of goals. These are not exclusive goals for the research community to tackle in order to meet this vision. So the first goal is to decrease the time it takes to get from we find that there's a contaminant in water to we have a strategy to get rid of it. If it needs to be gotten rid of. So you know, this is really, you could think of this as preparing for the next PFAS that comes up. Promotion of technological innovation and the development of tools to track, discover, understand, and mitigate contaminants of emerging concern. Developing and deploying those tools and really advancing CEC decision making. Coordinating our federal research activities around CEC efforts, and then importantly, fostering transparency and public trust around contaminants of emerging concern and building trusting communities that we are committed to providing them access to clean and plentiful drinking water. So the strategy in the NECRI really lays out an emphasis that this is not just a focus of water quality at the tap, but this is really an ecosystem of the drinking water cycle that needs to be addressed. That we need to incorporate new transdisciplinary research and evolving data. And there's a very strong brand in the NECRI of this is an environmental justice and it is a climate change issue that we need to address as the federal government. And it lays out specific needs in detecting and assessing contaminants of emerging concern and identifying and mitigating adverse health effects through the development of partnerships and effective communication. So within the CEC team, we've set up a number of coordination teams because we have, now that the NECRI has been released publicly, we have a ticking clock of 365 days to implement a plan for interagency solicitations to address this research initiative. So look to see more on this probably at the May Council meeting so that we get ahead of the 365-day requirement. But we've stood up interagency work groups focused on that discovery piece. So this is using non-targeted analysis of drinking water, but linking it to effects-based monitoring so that we're not just identifying the compounds, but at the same time we're identifying the compounds, we're identifying potential mechanistic impacts that will allow us to prioritize those compounds for deeper, more rigorous risk characterization activities. And these risk characterization activities, start at the level of the cell and organotypic culture models through other NAMs and leading up to animal and ultimately to epidemiological research. So that we have, the goal here is that we have a platform all the way from discovery of contaminant through risk characterization that is seamless and interoperable across the federal research agencies that are communicating and coordinating these activities together. The legislation calls out specifically that these are not things that any one institute is to do by themselves. We are required to do joint solicitations. So at the same time that we're standing up these work groups to develop the initiatives to build that platform, we've also have established a work group that had its first meeting this morning to really look at the policy and practice behind how do we actually do interagency solicitation and how do we actually coordinate a research program that is part NIH, part EPA, part DOD, part US Geological Survey, part OPM, and really thinking about how do we address all of the different agency missions and needs in that research, while also making sure that it is done appropriately and with due oversight. With that, I will conclude 1 minute late and have set aside 14 minutes now for questions and any further discussion. Karen.
Hey, David, thanks for that. Wow, that was a lot. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around it all. But very early on, you had mentioned, and I would just like to applaud the efforts for recognizing female faculty members as being in a minority and underrepresented. Could you tell me a little bit more about that initiative? So I wasn't quite clear. So that's for a female faculty member who already has funding to ask for a supplement, or
it's for a supplement to an existing research grant to add additional support to support a junior level faculty. So essentially, this is a bridge to independence for a faculty level researcher.
That's wonderful. Like I said, I applaud the effort. But I wonder if there, so oftentimes for, well, anyone in science, but in women in particular, it may often be difficult for them to sort of obtain their first R01. So aside from the early investigator status and, the first time awardee benefits that they receive, I wonder if something like what you have in mind, but only at an earlier stage, maybe to help them to get their first grants and get going would be useful.
Yeah. So this was a mechanism that we have available, through the existing diversity supplement program.
Yeah.
So I know that there is work looking at other strategies to try to build, greater access to.
Yeah. Because I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think Gwen's here. She would know, but I'm not really sure if this is the case. But I would think that for anyone, like I said, but and particularly for women in science, that after they obtain grant funding, then they're successful at maybe equal levels. But I think getting to that first step is people are getting older and older in career stage and age. And at times it may make it even more difficult for women if they start families and that kind of thing, to focus on all of that, sort of to just get them a jump start in. I think once people, I don't know if this is correct, but I feel like once people are in, they're sort of set, right, for success. But getting in is really tough.
Yeah. And this is part of that effort to help them, it's kind of a bridge to independence. So they're established at the faculty level, but they haven't been successful yet in getting that R01. So this gets them some support that they can have their salary paid while they're getting the preliminary data and getting that.
Oh no, I think
I do also want to stress that because you addressed the maternity issues. The reentry supplement program has always been an option for women who take a hiatus regardless of career stage. So that does go back to the post-baccalaureate, pre-doc, postdoc. So that is another opportunity for women to help with that issue. I want to emphasize that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Yeah. Irva.
Hi, yeah, this is sort of a follow-up to Karen's question, and that is, it says biological sciences, and I'm just wondering how broadly that is defined. And so, for instance, is epidemiology considered a biological science? Which, this is one of those issues that reappears from time to time.
So I am not an epidemiologist, but even I would attest that epidemiology is a biological science. But really, it's any of those programs that are eligible for the diversity supplements would be eligible for this program.
Oh, okay. So
your R01 research. The P30s and P42s are ireligible for diversity supplements now. So any of those programs would be an option to consider this.
That's great to hear. Yeah, that's great to hear.
Irva, just epidemiology is indeed a biological science. Let there be no mistake about that.
Some people don't think so, but some of my own colleagues in my P30.
Well, that's another discussion.
Great, thanks. I'll tell them that Rick said so.
Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, and I think I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's presentations on Pfos to hear. I think there's lots of issues there that come up, and it's such a. I think unlike almost any other compound, any other class of compounds where, PCBs, for instance, people tended to focus on the 5 or 6 most common ones. PFAS is kind of different because they're in so many different places, and there seem to be an innumerate number of them, and it's a constantly changing. Some studies we and other people have shown that some of the ones that we've been, the PFOS and so forth, some of those are kind of going down as others are going up when we've barely gotten into the field and started studying them. So it's, I think it's also kind of, which is a sign of the times and the ability of modern molecular chemistry to kind of keep moving, and for the manufacturers and polluters to keep changing their formula to avoid the growing evidence on any one of these compounds, and so I think it's a hard area to crack in a way, but got to do it.
Yep, for sure. Gary, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to ask some questions about the NECRI idea. This seems kind of like fanciful fantasy unicorn, like the idea of like, what could it actually become that scientists that are typically NIH funded could contribute to? Like I know that you're planning, but do you have like some hypothetical examples of what might involve NIH investigators?
Yeah, so I think, and remember, this is not just NIH investigators. This is interagency effort. But if you think back to the Charleston, West Virginia Elk River spill a few years ago, so very clear in the community the day it happened that there was something going on here, that there was no clue what it was. So get the analytical chemists who have the ability to pull the water samples, look to see what's in the water sample, feed that into our organotypic culture system so that at the same time, we're finding the compounds that are present there that aren't in normal drinking water. We're starting to screen potential mechanistic effects, potential toxicities of those. So, we may not be involved with the analysis of the water, although many of our untargeted labs could be doing that as well. But that would probably be supported more by NIST, by EPA, by US Geological Survey. Whereas we and FDA and our more health-related agencies would be doing more of the risk characterization, mechanistic kinds of research.
But that's like a reactive situation. From a research program, like what is the sort of research infrastructure that would be dealt with between national laboratories and things? Like I'm just having a hard time envisioning how something like that could come together.
Yeah, and it's I will admit it is not yet clear how much of this is an NHANES kind of surveillance program for drinking water, or how much of this is a HERE kind of infrastructure program that some community has a concern and says, there's something going on here. We want to know what it is. I think that there are potential for either kind of model. Obviously, one of them is a much larger kind of effort that's more surveillance than the other. But I think you'll probably see both iterations in the ultimate. Terry.
Thanks, David, for an interesting and wonderful presentation. I'm wondering also, sort of getting back to some of Phil's comments earlier about international collaborations in this area, if there was ever a candidate series of compounds or class of compounds for REACH legislation and the precautionary principle, it would probably be PFAS. And I'm wondering whether or not efforts are going to be made to collaborate across the Atlantic and see whether or not the interventions that have been put in place there because of their unique legislation and approaches to chemical regulation might in fact already give us some hints about whether interventions in these areas work.
Yeah, so you have jumped right past my expertise, Terry. So I'll turn it over and see if maybe Brian or Heather or Bill want to weigh in if you have any experience or have had any conversations with international colleagues.
Hey, Dave, thanks. I don't think I can add a whole lot to this other than to say that there is engagement across the pond, particularly around comparing notes on what we understand about human health effects. But I really couldn't tell you how much engagement we've had in trying to understand the impact of mitigation strategies or anything like that. It's a great point.
And Bill, I know remembered is not on today. Heather, are you on? Do you have anything to add?
Actually, while we're waiting for them, Brian, maybe you can answer this question. So some of the PFAS species that have been removed from the market in the United States, are they in use in other countries, PFOA, PFOS, or other molecules?
That's a good question, Rick. I would not be surprised if there's not still some production and use in some places, but Lynn just
they are.
Okay.
Yes, they are. The answer is yes. And there is a global process for listing POPs and for getting bans on POPs under the Stockholm Convention. And PFAS has been under discussion in that context for a while, but this is a global problem, absolutely.
Well, that's really frightening. So just to be clear, so PFOA and PFOS as two molecules within the umbrella of PFAS, they are still being marketed globally?
As far as I know. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So yeah, I believe there are domestic companies in places that have advanced manufacturing, like India, possibly also China, where these things are even still being produced. But anyway, I think the best way to figure that out, I think, some of the global surveillance that people have done, like looking at the trends of these things in whale blubber. And I mean, that's the way you're going to know about what's really going on globally, where it's all kind of distilled into one place. And you can kind of make inferences about where they're coming from. But no, this is a really, really difficult issue on a global basis.
Okay.
Just kind of chiming in here too. I mean, the other scary part is that these different molecular entities all under the umbrella of PFAS are in consumer products and people probably don't know that there is PFAS in these consumer products. I was actually shocked to learn that fancy high-tech dental floss is coated with PFAS. So
right, Rick, and then those products wind up in incinerators, you know, so yep.
Okay, I think it's 3 o'clock, so I think in the interest of time, let's move on to Sharon and an update on our worker training in infectious disease program. So this is something that I suspect many of you are largely unaware of, but I think it's really fascinating and important work that our worker training program is doing. So Sharon and John, if we can get Sharon's slides. Oh, actually, Sharon, you were going to share your own.
Okay, can you see the slides?
Yep, we got the full screen.
Full screen, great. Thank you so much, David. Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Beard, and I'm the director of the NAEHS Worker Training Program. I'm delighted to share with you our activities around infectious disease training to date and plans for the future. Here's the outline of what I'm going to cover today. The Superfund Amendments and Reauthorization Act of 1986, SARA, authorized the Worker Training Program to provide training and education of workers engaged in activities related to hazardous materials, hazardous waste, and emergency response. We oversee and administer multiple programs to support our mission to prevent work-related harm by providing training for hazardous materials handlers, chemical emergency responders, and cleanup workers. We do this through our national network of over 100 nonprofit safety and health organizations that receive funding to conduct the training and represent 17 training consortia via cooperative agreements. We conduct training in all 50 states and U.S. territories. Overall, we have trained 4.5 million workers since the start of our program in '86. In general terms, we reach approximately 160,000 workers annually under our combined programs. The primary worker training program has 3 components: our hazardous waste worker training program, which is our core that all grants must contain, and optional program components, including our hazmat disaster preparedness training and our environmental career worker training program. There are additional programs that you see here. NIEHS Department of Energy Nuclear Worker Training Program, which was initiated in 1993, provides safety and health training for hazardous materials handlers, waste and maintenance workers at DOE facilities. We had a 3-year biosafety infectious disease program that was initiated in 2016. And we currently have our small business SBIR grant program for the development of e-learning technology for our target population. Of course, we'll discuss more today about what we're doing under our infectious disease program. We have been involved in infectious disease training for a while with the start of our engagement on bloodborne pathogens, with a history of working with early grantees, including healthcare workers, with the Service Employees International Union and others. And we have evolved based on the emergence of other pathogens and exposures around diseases such as H5N1, anthrax, H1N1, mold around severe storms. And then we moved to Ebola in 2016 and COVID-19 in 2020. Our focus has always been to encourage innovation and training, to develop appropriate adult education techniques and literacy and training quality improvement to those high-risk workers. In particular, in 2016, we used our newly developed pathogen safety data guide and training module to clarify the use of pathogen safety data resources currently available for development of infectious disease occupational control plans in a broad spectrum of industries. During the Ebola crisis, the worker training program conducted a gap analysis that led to the development of this PSD guide and training module to enhance our all hazards approach for infectious disease training. The Ebola Biosafety and Infectious Disease Program began in June of 2016 and ran through May of 2019. The program was funded through a $10 million transfer to NAEHS via the CDC using Ebola emergency supplemental appropriations. We had made 3-year awards for a total of $9 million for new cooperative agreements. NAEHS focused on building federal capacity for biosafety, biosecurity, biopreparedness, and rapid response to emerging infectious disease with a focus on Ebola. It included developing an infrastructure of trainers and organizations who can be a resource during emergencies. The focus of bringing subject matter experts on infectious disease and our network of emergency responders and health and safety workers together was instrumental in the success of this initiative. We launched it with our federal partner, CDC, among others. We funded 8 grantees with a focused training plan to include SMEs in infectious disease, biosafety, biosecurity, to address the goals described here with a specific focus on targeted safety and health training programs, key worker populations with an all hazards approach, to really focus on risk reduction, stratification, and infection protection skill sets applicable to working in potentially contaminated environments. And lastly, to empower workers through evidence-based curriculum. Over the course of the response, training was conducted in 36 states and Puerto Rico. Our grantees delivered over 1,700 courses to over 36,000 workers and developed 40 new curriculum. I encourage you to review these resources and tools on our webpage and reports. The Ebola training reached many sectors and prepared grantees for future infectious disease events, with the particular focus on healthcare and the public health workforce, emergency responders, health sector, and other service workers. So I'm going to give you a summary of a couple of the grants that we funded under this program and what they did. The EMRI Ebola Biosafety Program worked closely with large national emergency response partners, the American Medical Response and Air Methods Corporation. Through these partnerships, more than 4,800 awareness courses were completed across the country. Additionally, operator and technician level courses have been taught in Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and Nebraska. EMRI's training reached transport providers in critical places, such as the Hartsfield-Jackson and Atlanta International Airport, which has an on-site quarantine station that could be involved in the transport to EMRI Ebola Treatment Center. Another consortium, the United Steelworkers Tony Mazzocchi Center, with their partner, the Communication Workers of America, trained passenger agents and flight attendants on infectious disease, health, and safety. For passenger agents, they were working with American Airlines, Envoy Air, and Piedmont Airlines. The CWA Occupational Safety and Health Department worked also with the Association of Flight Attendants, and those trainers conducted train-to-trainer for their staff and members that reached hundreds of flight attendants during this period. And in closing, in reference to our Ebola infectious disease program, in 2020, the worker training program, along with our National Clearinghouse for Worker Safety and Health Training, published an editorial in the Journal of Emergency Management that really discusses the history of the worker training program and how the program builds capacity to respond to infectious disease and biosafety events. With this work, we have built a capacity during the COVID-19 pandemic by quickly filling knowledge gaps with effective training. Now I'm going to move forward and focus on our activation of COVID-19 training. This timeline shows a snapshot of events and response from initial detection of SARS-CoV-2 virus and our engagement in this training. On March the 6th, we received the COVID coronavirus preparedness and response supplemental funding from the Act. We received $10 million for this supplemental appropriation. Worker training program engaged early on as we had to pivot our activities to move a worker training workshop that was to be held in Atlanta at Emory to a virtual infectious disease workshop on March the 17th. And that helped to lay the framework on how we would use our existing knowledge and resources to start COVID-19 training efforts. We also worked to develop and release our COVID-19 training tool and website on March the 23rd. And we supplemented our existing training grants and developed additional supplemental funding opportunities to expand our training to our total grantee pool. The workshop we had at Emory really focused on strategies to protect frontline workers from COVID-19. Discussions will also focus on addressing national and local challenges in biopreparedness and response. Lessons learned from worker training, Ebola and infectious disease grantees were shared, and we developed communication concepts to manage perception, stigma, and stress. The report is available for you to review. So the goal of the Worker Training COVID-19 Safety Initiative was to increase health and safety awareness for responders and workers who face potential exposure to COVID-19. The key objectives were to focus on key evidence-based methods to prevent and respond to COVID-19 exposure in the workplaces, providing essential services during the pandemic, to create a virtual platform for frontline healthcare, emergency responders, law enforcement, environmental, and critical service workers, and build a cadre of virtual trainers and advisors to deliver remote training via advanced training technology to frontline workers on infectious disease control measures, mental health resilience, and personal protective equipment usage. And of course, we had to then pivot to start doing training in the field once we were able to get our guidance and materials developed. As in the past with other disasters and public health emergencies, Worker Training Program worked with federal partners and our clearinghouse to develop several training tools. The first training tool developed was Protecting Yourself from COVID-19 in the Workplace. It was an awareness level training designed to inform workers about how to protect themselves and co-workers from exposure of the virus. It was developed in English and in Spanish. Later, following input from several COVID-19 webinars, we worked with partners to develop the Essential and Returning Workers training tool. This training was designed specifically for essential and returning workers about how to assess risk of workplace exposure to the virus and define key steps for protection and infection control. It was available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. To date, in that training, we've developed and sent out 9,500 booklets in English and 7,500 in Spanish. In addition to the training tools, we developed fact sheets and checklists that aid in planning exposure control plans for diverse workers were added, and as more we learned about COVID-19 transmission. Fact sheets for vaccinations include one on injection safety and vaccinators and vaccine administrators. They were made available in multiple languages: English, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. We also had several technical briefs that provide guidance for subject matter experts on technical issues, such as building an occupational infection prevention and control plan, and the use of portable air cleaners to protect workers from exposure. These resources and more are continuing to be updated and are available on the Worker Training COVID-19 website. Specifically, there are grantee resources about training that has been done prior to with our Ebola training. We have also training that they're doing currently. We have a COVID-19 toolbox, and we have links to other government documents. We developed a COVID-19 general awareness tool into an asynchronous e-learning package with the assistance of our clearinghouse and Vivid Learning Systems. Grantees use this tool and incorporate it into their own learning management training or use the online tool. And 90% of the folks who attended this training increased their knowledge on how to control COVID-19 workplace exposures based on an evaluation. The categories of workers trained include management, construction, first responders, healthcare, military, science, and others. Our worker training clearinghouse used a multi-step approach to conduct a needs assessment with our grantees to determine training gaps and needs to make sure that we developed effective training. Our grantees voiced similar challenges and concerns as it relates to training during COVID-19 pandemic. A few of those are listed on this slide. Of course, misinformation about COVID-19 for workers in general public, grantees recognize misinformation and education about COVID-19 can cause major stresses in the workplace and unnecessary exposure to those workers in their day-to-day operations. We address issues of scarcity of personal protective equipment and limited respirators use. And we talked about convincing workers about other effectiveness of engineering and admin controls being more effective than personal protective equipment. And they're looking at higher levels of respiratory protection, not just focusing on N95s. Our National Clearinghouse also developed a material upload and search tool for infectious disease called MustID. This database to house science-based resources and training tools to inform worker safety during the current COVID-19 outbreak and those to come. The MustID database is still in the process of being populated, so expect more resources to be continually added. This is just a snapshot of attendance of the first year of the pandemic. Our grantees updates are still happening. They've turned into our monthly grantee webinars. We continue to offer additional webinars, as you can see in our next slide. With more knowledge, our webinars became more comprehensive and covered many worker health and safety topics, including overlap with other public health issues like the opioid pandemic. December 7th, 2020 was the kickoff of our COVID-19 Winter Series. Here you'll see 4 webinar sessions that represent some of the areas covered between January 2021 and December. In between, we also developed 2 technical workshops using best practices to sustain training during COVID-19 and other disasters in April. And we had another workshop on advancing partnerships to improve worker health and safety training in October of 2021. Our latest webinar was on August the 31st that really focused on worker training programs' effects on COVID-19 response, plans ahead for future infectious disease threats. This focused on bringing in our partners at NAEHS from the Health Equity Program and CDC regarding their Emergency Operations Program. And grantees were able to share how our training would be used to address new threats, using community health workers as a key advocate to protect workers and translate knowledge, and work with vulnerable populations such as food and service industries to make sure that we protect workers from the start. Amy Lieberman from the Migrant Clinician Network did a fantastic job showing how you can use resources to train these advocates and community health workers in the field to do this important work. So our specific supplemental funds from 2020 to 2022 allowed grantees to deliver specific training on COVID-19 health and safety that looked at development of curricula tailored to worker populations, adapting current training tools, the delivery of online blended technology enhanced training, focused on our existing hazardous materials training and adding key concepts that were particular to COVID-19. Innovative use of technologies include skills development on virtual platforms. We created methods for safe in-person training using physical distancing and infection control procedures as people return to work. And I will share with you a couple of the highlights of this training. As you can see, we made 40 awards totaling $9 million to fund our COVID-19 training efforts through these NOCs. And in 2021, start of our program year, we made supplements to our existing grantees. The United Steelworkers Tony Mazzocchi Center reached a variety of healthcare and non-healthcare workers. They conducted webinars for healthcare workers on the basis of COVID-19 and appropriate protective measures and return to work issues, as well as English and Spanish webinars for non-healthcare workers on the basis of COVID-19 and appropriate protective measures. So these programs really focused on those key target industries of food workers, domestic workers who are not getting access to appropriate training or personal protective equipment. Their fact sheets on disinfectants and COVID-19 protections were very well received and were utilized by thousands of workers in various communities. Our Prevention, Preparedness, and Response P2R Consortium, based out of the University of Texas Health Science Center, reached a wide variety of workers needing training. They really focused on some of the more technical aspects of training, such as decontamination and reuse of N95 filtering faceplate respirators and other respiratory equipment, and improving airflow in labs and critical workplaces. In this picture, you see Dr. Sean Gibbs giving a community level COVID-19 response training in 2020, where they focused their efforts on retail, restaurant, entertainment establishments, places of places of worship, personal care establishments, and many others. This is just a portion of the workers targeted by the training. With the engagement with labor organizations, we have reached a broad number of construction workers that continue to work during COVID. Other workers trained include those in food service, waste haulers, maritime, and other transportation and critical areas to keep our economy going. And our grantees were making sure they received up-to-date information throughout the pandemic. In 2021 and 22, we released another NOCI that focused on our COVID-19 essential recovery centers. We funded 8 with plans to, actually we did fund 2 more additional centers that just happened in August. These centers promote health and safety and recovery training for essential workers and communities, and really focusing on partnering with those local businesses, community organizations, and worker centers. They also support a diverse workforce by providing multilingual education materials, education about vaccines, and connecting COVID vulnerable communities to local resources, including housing and job assistance. The New England Consortium, with their partners, the Civil Service Employees Association, their recovery centers focused on collaborations in Massachusetts and Connecticut to provide health and safety education training and courses and multilingual fact sheets. For example, in Massachusetts, they held 3 multilingual town halls to train workers in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and Nepalese. These town halls included workers for some of the most hard-hit industries, including the restaurant and domestic care industries. In Connecticut, they also had a town hall focused on pandemic-related health and safety issues that occurred in the Waterbury Hospital, and it continues to address employee concerns. Sustainable Workplace Alliance actually targeted youth, elderly, and essential workers in Florida and Puerto Rico. What was important about this particular consortium is that they were able to get out to rural areas and the mountainous areas of Puerto Rico, and they implemented activities around vaccine counseling, job and career development referrals, because they were interacting with transportation workers, environmental cleanup workers, water and sewage and treatment workers, because the island itself was continuing to still clean up as a result of terrible hurricanes and trying to rebuild their infrastructure. They took the training to hundreds of residents in the formal communities for those not able to attend these formal courses. To date, with the $10 million, we've implemented this National Health and Safety Training Response Program. And to date, we've awarded $9 million through 40 supplemental grants to develop training delivery and building a cadre of workers to deliver remote and in-person training. We currently have 9 COVID recovery centers that are continuing to do work. We were able to reach over 100,000 workers overall, and we offered a total of 2,800 courses online and in person. And like I said before, recently, August, September, we funded our 2nd year of our recovery centers. And also we did a second round of funding where we actually awarded 2 additional centers. In summary, we've conducted an evaluation of our COVID training efforts and included that in our approach. We developed our infectious disease training strongly, and it increased our capacity and helped us to respond. The ability to bring in grantees from across the country together in collaboration with staff, contractual resources, and SME really prepares us for all hazards and future pandemics. Many of these workers were vulnerable because of their nature of work. And so we really wanted to make sure that we develop those specific tools to address high-risk workers and those key activities. And we will continue to do the work because this COVID-19 pandemic is not over. We still have to be very vigilant. According to the CDC data tracker, it reminds us that there are still more than 60,000 new cases of COVID-19 reported daily in the US and more than 300 deaths each day. Our hospitalizations are still at around 4,200, and we only have 34.9% that have their first booster dose regarding vaccination. Our work is not over. As you can see from our grantee community with this quote, we continue to incorporate lessons learned using our all hazards approach. We continue to actively engage with our grantees, our federal partners, and other stakeholders via webinars and other events such as technical workshops. We will remain nimble and adjust our approach to COVID-19 as it changes. Another quote here reminds us of our existing worker training infrastructure that has been instrumental to promote continuing learning and adjustment. And our engagement will expand to bring in subject matter experts as needed to meet any new emerging threats. I wanted to make sure I shared some acknowledgements. A must is to the key worker training staff and our partners in training operations in the worker training program. That includes Demia Wright for her leadership in developing our infectious disease reports, analyzing data and communication efforts. Jim Remington, our hazmat response and infectious disease nurse practitioner. Kathy Allmark, and the support of our contractors to engage in these efforts. And our newest team member, Talon Barnes. Thanks to all DIRT staff, including our administrative officers, grants management, and scientific review staff that provided outstanding support to our training efforts. And thanks to other staff, including our National Clearinghouse for Worker Safety and Health Training for their exceptional support to development of these training tools. And also we had some great subject matter experts, Dr. Amber Mitchell on infectious disease and Eric Prasad on evaluation and analyzing data. And I will close and say I have to also thank our past director for worker training, Joseph Hughes, for his outstanding work to prepare us to engage in these ever-changing hazards. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Any questions? Irva.
First, I just want to say what a fabulous program that you have put in place. And, you know, I think I've heard short summaries of the worker training program that NAEHS runs, but what a treat to really see the whole breadth of what you've done. And you know, I really want to shout out for the work that you've done around COVID at the workplace, which, you know, early on in the pandemic, it got a bit of attention because of a few outbreaks here and there of meatpacking here and so forth. But the fact that the workplace was continually a major place of transmission was sort of lost along the way. And so, you know, this is really wonderful work. And I want to connect with you a little more because of our work around farm workers and also domestic workers. So maybe we can, I went to the website and it's not easy to actually find this, this whole program, or at least particularly this COVID work around education and training. So just a note that maybe I went to the wrong place, but I kind of searched for it. Didn't really find this kind of things that you were talking about today. So,
well, we have put some links in the presentation and also in the chat box to share with council members about these and our recent new reports that we have. One of the best places to receive information about what we do is in our National Clearinghouse weekly news brief, because we upload all of the new data and new resources that we have around all of our training programs through that that news brief that comes out weekly on Fridays. But you had mentioned about you know, meat packers and food and domestic workers. We spent an exorbitant amount of time trying to develop great resources, multilingual resources, training programs to go out and do this type of work through our existing grantees. I've mentioned the Tony Mazzocchi Center, their work with the National Day Laborers Network, and then also the work that they've done out in California and other places. And also they've been responding and doing this work doing our disaster response. And so it was easier for us to really go out and engage with those groups because we had already had an established track record of doing these intensive trainings based on disasters. So I can certainly share more with you about some of those activities and about what we're currently doing.
Thank you.
Terrence?
Sharon, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. I want to congratulate you also on the success of this program. It's a fabulous and very important program, obviously. One of the questions I have is during the process of especially training about vaccine effectiveness and the old concerns, I guess, that some people might have had around that, did you also track whether or not there was a difference in the employer's acceptance, I guess, of some of these trainings? And did this vary by sector? In other words, how much employer buy-in do you get with some of these trainings, and can that be somehow tracked with the program? Thank you.
Well, some of the evaluations that took place by our grantees looked at employer buy-in, and one of the most effective measures that we saw of it is that our ability to move our recovery centers and our grantees to go in and help establish vaccination appointments for workers who engaged in some of those high impact industries. And we did a lot of that through our recovery centers based on the work that we have been doing, and it's currently still ongoing. I know that our new grants to the New England Consortium will continue to do that in the Northeast with their work, and then also with a lot of the public health workers through the Civil Service and Employee group. And then the United Auto Workers is going to be continuing to do some work along with some of the multilingual work. But we have not, other than the evaluations that our individual grantees have done, I'm not sure if we have the issue on employer buy-in. I will also check with our with Eric Pfas, who has done an evaluation of our work, to see if we might be able to pull out any data from any of our grantees reports to look at that and to see if we can come up with some information.
Great, thanks.
Great, thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you again, Sharon. Great presentation as always.
Great,
So
you.
I think we are up to our next break.